Yeah, hello. We're here today to talk about how to recognize excellence in award committees. And I'm talking to you because you're a member of an award committee of the CSC or CIC. I'm director of awards of the CSC. And as a director of award, it is my responsibility to make sure that the awards are handed out equitably and that the process is fair. So the main thing we want to do today is essentially trying to give guidelines on how to select an award winner and how to recognize excellence when you see it. And I'm here today with Stephanie Simpson.
Stephanie Simpson, I'm the director of the Human Rights Office at Queen's.
And the main reason we decided that this would be a necessary exercise is because in 2015, as some of you may know, there was a great imbalance actually in the awardees of the CSC Awards. The CSC, the Canadian Society for Chemistry, administers 18 awards. I'm chairing all these committees, by the way. And of these 18 awards, 17 went to men. And the 18th award only went to a woman because it was the Clara Benson Award, and it cannot be awarded to a man. And that caused quite a bit of concern, I should say, within the society and, of course, also within the board of directors. And there are many reasons why this has been so lopsided. I'm going to mention a few of them in a minute. But the main point here is that what we're trying to do is that the award winners should represent the diversity of the society and not be self-selecting people who are more like them. And so we want to avoid that we eventually look like the Brazilian cabinet here, which is all white males. So the way to address this problem is, first of all, we need more nominations for women. So I would be asking all of you to ask your female colleagues to consider themselves being nominated or nominate them into all awards, not just the Clara Benson Award. We also want to increase the participation of women on award committees because that's really important. We want to mentor female scientists by previous award winners or high-profile female scientists. The main thing we want to do today, though, is we want to make sure that the award committees themselves are aware of what kind of biases they might have. And that's really what Stephanie and I are sort of intend to do today.
So our outline for this webinar is just to first look at what equity is and how it's relevant to selection processes. We're then going to look at what inequity looks like in selection processes. And finally, we're going to go through a scenario with you in which we illustrate how biases can arise in selection processes and the things that people can do to counter bias.
Right. So we're hoping that by the end of this brief session, you would be able to understand what equity is and how it is different from equality. You may be able to recognize when a selection process is not equitable, so recognize inequities in the selection process, and then also be self-aware and know that what you have to do to overcome your own biases, should you have any. And I do want to point out, and this is non-scripted, everybody has biases. I did the test on myself. I can let you know how to do a test if you're interested to see whether you're biased. And as it turns out, I actually have a medium strong bias against women, and I wasn't aware of this, but apparently my wife was. But then it turns out that she also has a bias against women. So it is something that we all might have, but it is, once you're aware of it, I think you can work on overcoming it. All right.
So first of all, just a short discussion about what equity is. So just a textbook definition of equity tends actually to lean towards a definition of equality. So people think about the quality of being fair or impartial. But that's only half the story when we're talking about equity. To be equitable, we also need to be mindful of the ways in which people have been historically marginalized within our society. And we need to create organizational goals and processes that are aimed at ensuring that individuals in all of their diversity are able to participate and contribute to their full potential. So when we're thinking about equity, we're not thinking about formal equality, we're thinking about substantive equality, ways in which we may need to do things differently in order to ensure equality of outcome for all individuals. So there have been numerous studies done that demonstrate how biases affect selection processes. And we've just given a few examples of some of the commonly cited research around this. So one commonly cited study showed that faculty members who were given resumes to evaluate with randomly assigned male and female names would tend to favor the resume with the male name. And in fact, it didn't matter whether the evaluator was male or female. They both, like you and your wife, tended to have a slight bias towards males.
And that also transcends to publications. So when college students evaluate papers and try to see whether the paper is credible and the author is competent, they tend to believe male authors more than female authors.
And finally, there have been studies done which show us that when evaluators are rushed and distracted within the process of evaluation, they will tend to favor male candidates over female candidates. So the findings from that research are that when people slow down and take their time, there tend to be more equitable outcomes across the spectrum.
I don't think there's any prof who is not distracted and rushed, ever.
Okay, so as Peter indicated, there are biases that affect our selection processes. All of us are affected by biases. We all have a particular lens on the world. And there are 6 common forms of bias that tend to arise in selection processes. We have affinity bias, which is the tendency to favor applications from individuals who are similar to you. It's very common. We have normative bias, which is a preference for traditional career paths. It's a bit of a shortcut. People rely on established norms in terms of how to evaluate excellence. We have performance bias, which is a tendency among some people very unconsciously and unintentionally to overestimate the performance of individuals who are not from equity-seeking groups. So individuals who have been privileged within the institution over groups that have been less represented. Stereotyping, everyone would be familiar with that. It's the assignment of characteristics to a person based on their perceived membership in a group. Confirmation bias is a predisposition to find or not to find information that confirms one's stereotypes and assumptions. And finally, we have performance attribution bias, which is the tendency to assume that people in equity-seeking groups have achieved based on special advantages or programs that they may have been part of, as opposed to the merits.
All right, well, let's talk about a scenario. This is a scenario that may look familiar to many of you because you're on this committee. I've certainly seen much of this before. All right, well, just pretend we're an award committee and we're meeting here. So there's me, Peter, Irene, and Stephanie, and we have managed with some difficulty to find a time when we can all meet, maybe by teleconference, and discuss the nominations for the Jack Roberts Prize. I'm making something up here, obviously. The Jack Roberts Prize requires that the winner has made an outstanding contribution in, say, administrative chemistry. The winner would have to present an award lecture at the CSC, gets a $1,000 cash prize, and I don't know, maybe the conference registration. Okay, so because there's an unprecedented number of nominations for this award, the committee has already agreed by email to pre-read all these nominations and rank them. There are 14 of them, but they hope they will be able to get through them in the time allotted. Peter and Irene, let's say, have something immediately after, so they promise to be efficient. So they come to the meeting with initial rankings. The group quickly realizes that they have all ranked the same individuals, that is Mike Lee, Kristen Blair, and Claude Matheson as their top 3 candidates. And they feel this is a stroke of luck, and they proceed to eliminate the other 11 candidates right away.
So right off the bat, we've got a bit of a problem in terms of equity. what you've described is very, very common for committees and not necessarily an issue of inequity. The problem, though, is that if people have not decided or had a clear sense of what the criteria are before they eliminate all of those 11 candidates, then we may not have consistency in the way that these criteria are applied. The other thing that's happening is that people are deciding very quickly that these 11 candidates cannot possibly be meritorious.
Right.
And we know from the research that if people slow down and reflect and actually articulate their reasons, inequities are less likely to happen.
All right, let's just assume that within the first few minutes of discussion, the three committee members acknowledge that Dr. Matheson's package appears to be the strongest. It is large, he has way more publications than anybody else. It's lengthy, the nomination is lengthy by comparison to the others, and he clearly meets the criteria of having made an outstanding contribution.
So what interests me is the statement, clearly he meets the criteria of having made an outstanding contribution. And what I would be concerned about is that this is an example of normative bias, that because Matheson's CV follows the typical career trajectory, that it seems obvious to everyone that his CV is outstanding. And so again, the best practice is to slow down and reflect on those snap judgments, positive or negative, and really get under why it is that you feel that a person is an excellent candidate.
However, quickly flipping through the pages of Dr. Lee's CV, Irene also observes that Lee has maybe fewer peer-reviewed articles, but he has written book chapters and he has patents. And arguably, he has done just as much written work as Dr. Matheson. It's just a different form. It's not peer-reviewed publications, not the long list of papers. The committee is then in agreement, and they all acknowledge that Matheson and Lee are both maybe equal, and they know them both from academic conferences and realize that they're sort of on the same level, same stage of their career.
So one wonders at this stage how Matheson, at least initially, was edging in front of Lee. And one could wonder if this was an example of performance bias. Again, the assumption that that Matheson's qualifications were necessarily greater than Lee's just because he happens to be, a member of a group that was typically and largely represented within the institution. There's also a concern that there might be an affinity bias that's taking place here. Because Matheson and Lee are well known, are they getting an edge in this process over Kristen Blair, who perhaps is a little less known to the committee members?
Mm-hmm. So the committee for a moment is stuck. Are Matheson and Lee really equally deserving? For Peter, now the issue revolves around the criteria for the award. He raises the question, how is the committee judging outstanding contribution? Looking at the three packages again and the relative merits of each package, they determine that really what makes Dr. Matheson's application stand out is the innovation in the discipline. Within the past 5 years, Dr. Matheson has made, let's say, a big invention that he patented. His students spun off a company. And on this basis, they decide that Dr. Matheson is the more innovative and therefore has made more of an outstanding contribution and is then clearly the winner.
So I take no issue with the idea that Matheson has obviously done some wonderful things. My concern is that the committee decided on the criteria for what outstanding would be in the middle of the process as opposed to the beginning of the process. So in essence, they were looking for confirmation of what they had already decided. They had already decided that Matheson was the winner and went back in time to create criteria that would match their assessment. And this is an inequitable practice. People should be reviewing those candidate criteria before the process starts.
Right. So now Stephanie reminds her colleagues that they have not yet discussed her third applicant, that is Dr. Blair, Dr. Kristen Blair. For transparency, they also should be able to rank her among the top 3 and then decide on why she is not winner of the award and why her contributions are not outstanding compared to those of Matheson. They had all included Dr. Blair because she has made some outstanding contributions, especially in collaboration with a Chinese university involving citizen science, but at an undergraduate level. So this is a project that involves a lot of undergraduates, team-based problem solving with a very large impact on education, but not so much in publications. So the project caught everybody's eye, but they also agree that it is early in the process. It's still in its infancy, and it's too little information in the nomination to say whether that project will actually be successful.
This is a bit of a tricky one. I think that committee members should be thinking about whether, again, they're applying a normative bias to the situation. So are they considering excellence in its diversity? Kristen Blair is doing something a little bit unusual, and sometimes it's unusual scholarship that gets put to the side because people are unsure of how to evaluate it. There's also the issue of quantity versus quality. In this culture, people are very, very impressed by long lists of publications and distinctions and awards. And it may be useful to be thinking about Kristen Blair in terms of the quality of what she's produced, even though at this stage in her career she has not produced much of it. Finally, the committee at this stage is looking for evidence of impact. And my question would be, have they looked for the same evidence of impact with the other candidates, or are they now yet again applying a different criteria to Kristen Blair?
Right. Because just because you have a lot of publications doesn't mean that they are being read, for example, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So Irene now observes that Dr. Blair is still a young scholar, and maybe in a few years her application is going to be stronger when her project has given some fruit. So as the committee members now close the meeting and clandestinely check their emails and walk away, they wonder if maybe Dr. Blair shouldn't be asked to consider applying for the Clara Benson Award, so an award that is specifically earmarked for women.
I think that it could be fine for Kristen Blair to apply for the Clara Benson Award, but my concern might be that the committee members are placing her in a box, stereotyping and suggesting that as a woman that this is really the only award that she could be competitive for. And really, Kristen Blair has a lot of potential and she should be competing equally with her colleagues for all of the awards.
So we were giving the scenario here because it's quite typical. This is the kind of thing that you might encounter. And I'm not prescribing how you should come to your decision. The only thing I ask everybody to do is to be aware of your own biases that you might have and give it enough time and consciously define what criteria you're using and then apply these criteria as you go through the nominations. And everybody can have different criteria. That's okay. It's a matter of the character of the committee, of the makeup of the committee. Nobody is going to second guess what you have decided, but I want you to be aware of your own biases that you might have in the hope that you overcome them. And so anyway, so this is basically all we had to say, and we wish you best of luck with your award selection process. Thank you very much.
Best of luck.